All right, so this video is being recorded. You'll be able to view this at any time on our YouTube page for reference on the exercises, but all of you should have received at least a Gait manual. It's about 9 pages long. It's a PDF that has a lot of links and some helpful information that you guys can access between visits, we'll say. I'm still in clinic mode here. We good? All right. So moving on. So gait, walking, is really the fundamental way at which we move about in the world to experience the world. Gait is a genetically ingrained movement pattern that we establish in our developmental sequence and practice throughout our early adolescence to become more masters in the reciprocation of the pelvis and the shoulders and the trunk and the ability to coordinate walking or balance and head position and visual tracking. There's a lot of complexity to it, but we can break it down into its component parts. And we can use those component parts to develop kind of a functional context in which to examine the body when we're operating in the clinic, or a functional context for you guys to think about a movement pattern or intentionally exercise a specific movement pattern or a region of your body, and to have a context from which you're going to experience the beginning and then the after effects. And the more that we can learn about the component parts, treat the component parts, we can integrate those component parts back into the whole. And that's what we call the motor learning process. And that's often lost when we have injuries or problems that develop where we need to feel the body, we need to get the mobility, the mechanical capacity of the body reinstated. And so what is mechanical capacity? Simply put, it's can you move where you need to move? And when we think about movement, we can limit our discussion to being just on a joint level. And if you think of a joint, you can think of two planes of tissues that are sliding next to each other, like your knee or your finger joints. But if you think bigger, you can look at the soft tissues around the body. So muscles, nerves, vascular, visceral organs, fascia, all these things need to move. Anything that touches something else is a space that's made to move. It's supposed to be slippery. Can it glide and slide? And can it go through the available range of motion? Or is it stiff? If you can't move, then your brain does not recognize an area very clearly. So you start to see deficiencies showing up in the neuromuscular phase of how you work with your body. And neuromuscular is really, do the right muscles turn on at the right time in the right sequence with the right strength and endurance. Now, if we take mechanical and neuromuscular on particular areas, and then we take that newfound capacity and we look at more combined movements or the strategies at which we move through space. Just because you have good mechanics and good firing muscles doesn't mean that you're using a strategy that allows you to access those parts of your body. So that's why we look at motor control, and gait is a big piece of our motor control study at IPA Physio. So why do we look so much at gait? We already said that because we can see a lot of complexities and we can break down its component parts and we can develop our treatment plan. We can make guesses about mechanical capacity, neuromuscular function, and we test those individual pieces on the table, or we do some things to see if we're right and if we can make a change and then make them move forward. And as we build that, what we're trying to do specifically, and what we're trying to accomplish today, is we're trying to focus on the neuromuscular phase of our treatment. How can the body reconnect its muscles to specific areas? What's the best strategy at which to go about reconnecting your muscles? Well, there's a ton of information out there between a lot of different camps, and really there's no better way to do it, in my opinion, than to go back to your basics. And your basics is the developmental sequence. Well, that developmental sequence is a genetically ingrained progression that most normally functioning individuals go through. So someone who hasn't had an insult to their brain or their spinal cord, or has some sort of other neurological condition or genetic problem. And if for all the parents that are out there, you can kind of go back to these milestones that we're trying to track in our youth. And so first thing you do, you take your baby to the pediatrician and they hold the baby on their stomach like this. And what they're looking for is they're looking for the body to go into an extension pattern and to see if those muscles are working. And that's one of the big emphases on tummy time, is to put babies onto their stomach where they will naturally raise their head, their neck, and their shoulders, and they'll kind of surf around the world and they'll look around. And in that process, they're developing the core of their back, the core of their shoulders, and their visual processing. I'm covering this a little bit more in detail in the handout. So if you want to look for a little bit more details for things that are going on in those phases, follow along on that. But I'm going to skip through things a little bit faster so we can get to some more of the other things. But if once you're on your belly and you see the baby kind of moving, you also get them onto their back and they're kicking their arms and their legs up and they're grabbing at the things up above them and they're developing their flexors, their head's coming up, their chest is coming up, and they're shaking and they collapse back down because they lose their endurance. They're in that process, you're going through these mass contractions of your core muscles, your fast twitch muscles, your slow twitch muscles, they're all kind of firing together and they're learning how to sequence themselves. And we spend several weeks to months just getting into this phase, right? And as the baby starts to get more powerful, more coordinated, all of a sudden they pick their head up and they move and what just happened? I rolled over onto my stomach, and they kind of look a little shocked sometimes to say, what just happened? And it's this nice development to say, hey, now we took this purposeful movement, this contraction, this movement, and we turned it into a functional task, and we moved over and we discovered that we have mobility. So as you go through and you practice your rolling and your mobility, you start to feel your shoulder blades and your trunk and your legs, and they all start to work together with good timing and strength and endurance, and the legs start to stretch out. And before you know it, that rolling turns into sitting, to propped on elbows, to surfing. And what I mean surfing is when they kind of crawl along the side of a wall. We aren't quite there in the developmental sequence, but elbows onto hands and knees and to moving around, and you're getting that weight-bearing compression into the shoulders and into the elbows. And that's where we really start to see some of the fundamentals of what we're looking for in our movement control, which is what we're going to talk about in Gait, which is mostly the reciprocation of the trunk, the shoulders and the pelvis moving in an undulating movement. All these things then just get more and more complicated. The baby and the individual starts to thrive a bit more, and they're having a great time squatting, sitting, moving, picking up, and engaging in the environment. And then we go into standing and progressing into ambulation. So you can see where I'm getting at. The more fundamental piece that we try to emphasize are some of these tummy times. Like I give my patient tummy time. You got to spend time on your tummy, or we got to practice rolling, or we got to practice crawling, because the hip injury that you had so long ago has shut down the motor control, the movement capacity of your pelvis. And sometimes there's no better way to do these things, to reintegrate these things, than to go back to our basic positions. Because if you can't do it in the fundamentals, then you sure as heck can't do it in more of the complicated gym programming that we're typically giving ourselves for conditioning and exercising. So a big emphasis on neuromuscular control through foundational movement patterns. It's genetically ingrained, and it's, in my opinion, the fastest way to make the brain connect back to an area. So what is really the ultimate outcome of our developmental sequence? Well, it's to develop an efficient, coordinated trunk, which is our powerhouse. So if you think of your glutes, you think of your abdominum, you think of your back muscles, all these muscles that live underneath the big muscles, those are the things that we're trying to build and integrate it together. So I'm going to show a video here, just so you can get an idea of what it is to have a trunk-driven movement pattern. Pardon the commercial here for a second. All right. 850. So if we're a trunk-driven movement pattern, what is a trunk-driven movement pattern? Well, let's look back at crawling. Pay attention to when the baby drives the left leg forward. You don't just see the hip moving in space, you see that pelvis moving in space. That big round bottom is starting to pull up and forward when the leg comes forward. When the baby pushes off the back leg, you can see some elongation coming out of the back side of the pelvis. Thank you. So the more important thing in the push-off phase, which would be in the walking cycle now, would be that elongation between the shoulder and the pelvis. This is a nice view here. You see, you get shortening, lengthening, shortening, lengthening. The shoulder blade comes down, the pelvis comes up. That's what we call reciprocal movements. And that is the efficiency of gait that we're trying to reinstate in most of our patients, because in a lot of the times we become extremity driven. How do I close this? Just escape it. Go back to the presentation. All right. So if we take this and we say, well, adults don't move that way. That's not how we're supposed to move. Well, let's see what the world's fastest man, what he looks like when he's running. What's the start time on that? It's right here. I got it. So what is the world's fastest man? That's Bolt right there. And I just want you to look at that engine right here. That is an engine. The pelvis is driving that leg forward with the hip flexor in the swing phase of motion. And now he's pulled up because he's so far ahead that he doesn't need to continue striding like the rest of them. So if we keep backing this up, I keep hitting the wrong button here. It's my mistake. Probably don't need this advertisement on bras, do we? So now look at his extension phase, the pushing off phase. Look at the elongation that he gets on his trunk. It really is a thing of beauty. And the elongation from the pelvis, the load transfer of pushing off the ground and creating length through that whole part of his body, the spine, the trunk, without any kind of gross impairments or what looks to be, like a very fluid movement. And that's what we call an efficient push-off, a trunk-driven movement. So from that perspective, if we just take a second and we can just analyze this just one more time, and we can look at the shoulder blade and we can talk about its role, and we will a little bit later, but I'm not going to put much emphasis on it. I just really want you to see the pelvis, because that is our motor. So if we look at that pelvis and you look at this pelvis or this pelvis, you're not going to see that elongation through the trunk on that green runner there. Where he starts to falter is in that full elongation of his torso. He almost stops short of being able to get that full stride length that Bolt is getting there. So he's losing some of that propulsion through space. This gentleman here has a big thump right in his lower back. So that's a mechanical and a neuromuscular problem right here, where he's losing force transfer in his leg up into his torso. And there's like a blocking kind of punching motion that goes on right in his lower back. I hope you guys can see that. And what you just don't see, you don't see those types of dysfunctions in Bolt, who just blows me away. You wouldn't know that he has a pretty decent scoliosis. So that's one thing to consider, is that you don't have to have the perfect spine to have really good body mechanics. So basically what we're talking about now is moving your body without even thinking about using your hips. Can you walk? Well, this is an interesting video. This shows a gentleman with no arms and no legs. I think that's pretty obvious. And lo and behold, he can ambulate. That is a trunk dependent walker. He has no real full extremity to pull from, to leverage from. I just think it's totally amazing. The concept here that we're trying to get is we want this engine moving. We want that pelvis to go down and back and up and forward, down and back and up and forward. Those are the big things that we're doing. This gentleman has a fusion at L3 to S1, so it's not perfect. And to get this left pelvis around, he has to extend, rotate, and side bend in his spine to achieve that movement. But you can see how the scapula the rib cage or the shoulder blade's taken over a bit there because he can't move the side very well. So he's really driving the motion from his shoulder blade. The right side does quite a bit better. You don't see some of those substitution patterns, but I just get a kick out of this. And I love watching this video because it inspires me to keep moving my pelvis. And this part of our body and most of your bodies is like a black hole. You don't know what it is to move it because it probably hasn't moved in a long time, especially now that we're into COVID and most people are not out moving around as freely as they once were. So in order to move something, it has to have the capacity to move. Your brain has to recognize it, and you have to have the right strategy to utilize it in space. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to break down walking into some really simple, basic patterns so we can talk about some of the prerequisites and some of the things that need to go on. I'm going to show this. If you guys want to get up and experience it, you can. We're going to do a big experience lab here in just a minute after doing this. So if you just would rather watch, you can do that. Let's go over to the blue wall. Okay. In the PT world, we learned about the phases of gait and about 8 of them. We're going to simplify it and put it into 3. And we're just going to talk about what happens in the swing phase when we bring our leg forward to initial contact, because when you hit the ground, everything changes. And then we're going to take the entire stance phase into this position here. So swing phase. Mechanical capacity, what do you got to have? Well, you got to have the excursion of elongation on this side to achieve the elongated position to where then you can pull from that tension that comes from the side. That was what you saw really beautifully in Bolt. He had that elongation, that range of motion, and that ability to elevate his pelvis, which is here, to come not just forward, but up and forward. So you have to have timing here. You have to have strength, you have to have endurance, you have to have motion. That swing phase. So think of that as a pull motion generated by your obliques, internal and external, your hip flexors, your adductors to an extent. And that's really what you're going for, is you're going for a pull motion. And the motion should be from a down and back to an up and forward position. We're not going all the way up here, but that would be the continuation of it. We're just going to advance the leg forward. As you advance the leg forward, you have to be able to elongate to drop that pelvis down to the initial stance. When you land on the foot, you start a whole process of shock absorption. So you have to have a strong foot, a coordinated foot, and a mechanically sound foot. And the injuries to the ankle change those things, which turns into a substitution pattern somewhere else in the body. So we want to have a strong foot, a coordinated foot to land with our trunk over the foot, to have the stability to take the weight of our trunk in our body and put it down into the leg, to be able to free the opposite leg to advance movement. So now you have to have balance, motor control. You have to be able to look around and not lose your balance or talk on your phone or hold your hands with your sweetie or walk your dog, whatever it is. This is a very important phase for stability. We want to be stable here and have controlled mobility around the lumbopelvic girdle. And we'll talk about that here in just a second. So as this leg's coming through mid stance into terminal stance, you're really getting into the pushing phase. So it's a pull to a weight acceptance to a push. Everything that happens on the stance leg is happening in its mirror image, the opposite, on the other side. So when my stance phase is in mid stance on the right, I'm in mid swing on the left. When I'm in initial contact here, I'm getting ready to pick this leg up to go into swing phase. So you can see why we emphasize the motor, the pelvis. We need this thing to be the driver of our motion. And I like to think of it just as this undulating movement of the bones in space. And it helps to put your hands on them to feel, because like I said, people don't feel this area so well. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so what are some of the common injuries that cause us to have a negative impact to our gait? All ankle sprains are important. I can't emphasize that enough to you, for your spouses, for yourself, and for your kids. Too often do we find that just because the pain's gone away and you've gained some of the motion of what we call dorsiflexion, where your toes come up towards your chest, or when you point your toes away, just because you have that motion and the pain's gone away does not mean that the problem is fixed. There are some very specific joints in the ankle that get torqued in the process of going through an ankle sprain, and very rarely do they get reinstated on their own. And so those are the heel bones and the talar bones, and we're not going to get too much into that conversation. But the reason why those are so important is just because what we said. When the foot hits the ground, everything changes. And your ankle back here, this is the heel bone here, is a torque converter. It's meant to take the forces of the earth and turn it into rotation that's then shock absorbed up the leg. And if you jam that joint, you're going to torque convert in your midfoot, and you're going to start overpronating or getting hallux valgus, where your toe turns in, or you're going to start whipping that knee around. Something's going to change somewhere. Don't let an ankle problem turn into a lower back problem, because it happens. It happened to me. It's one of the reasons why I got into physical therapy. And I can't express the importance of getting those things treated sooner than later. Not to mention, when you stop using your foot, you stop using your butt. And if you stop using your butt, you stop looking good in a bathing suit. You get the flat butt syndrome. So a healthy foot means a healthy butt. Hopefully that motivates you guys to take care of your feet. They're important. Now, big area here, simple slide, complex area, just to illustrate a point. How many times, if you guys can count on one hand, hopefully, have you fallen and hit your tailbone or your sit bone or your hip in some way? There is a long distance between you being upright to you landing on one of those surfaces of your body, and you can displace the bones themselves, the pelvic bones, the sacroiliac joint, which is here, if you guys can see my finger, or the coccyx to the sacrum, or the hip and its relationship, or you kind of tweak it all. And you might be stiff, you might be uncomfortable, you might develop a little bit of lower back pain, a little bit of hip pain, but then maybe it goes away. Symptoms go away, but have you restored the efficient mechanical capacity? That becomes a real big question mark. And that's where we ask that question to most of our patients. How many times have you fallen on your tailbone? So what happens when you lock up your pelvis? Well, you lose the ability for that engine to reciprocate, to churn, to move. And oftentimes the muscles shut down, particularly the muscles on the side of the hip, what we call the abductors, and then the extensors, or your glute medius and your glute maximus, the big muscles that come off of our butt, or that make our butt. And as soon as those stop working, then you start to develop compensatory movements where the pelvis dips in stance phase, or you start to over-recruit your lumbar muscles, or you lean to the left. You guys have all seen older people walking in the airports or the train stations, and they kind of waddle side to side. Well, that's a lifetime of dysfunction that's accumulated in most cases in this area. And the brain has a hard time stabilizing because it doesn't know how to access this region mechanically or muscularly, or in fact, use it in space. So this is what we see often. The hip drops, the muscles get weak, and you get stiff. And most of the time you tend not to hurt so much in the pelvis, but you tend to hurt in the lower back or the knee, or you have really tight muscles up into your rib cage. So think about these things when you are doing the work that we're doing, because a lot of times we can start to make some changes just by getting these muscles to turn on. But if you're having a hard time getting them to turn on, please consider getting that area at least mobilized so you have more success. So just as a quick recap here, the precursors to an efficient gait is you got to have the mechanical capacity, ankle, knees, hips, and pelvis. the muscle coordination, right timing, strength, and endurance. Now, we didn't talk about strategies, and that's what we're going to talk about in the first part of our lab here. But believe it or not, posture matters. You wouldn't hear that from anyone else besides a physical therapist. There is some debate about whether or not it causes pain, but efficient posture is a prerequisite for efficient muscle function. Now, if the trunk is a lot like a cylinder, a can of soda, that can needs to be vertically aligned so that the walls are nice and straight up and down, and it can contain the pressure that's generated inside the can, which is made by the carbonation. If you twist that can or put a dent in it, you're more likely to collapse that can. So if you empty a can out and punch a hole in the side of it, put a dent in it, and you stand on it, you're going to crush it. Well, that's kind of what the skeleton does when the muscles aren't supporting it. And if the bones are not straight up and down or close to it, the muscles have to work either too hard or not enough. And then you start to leak air, if you would. You start to lose that ability to access your musculature. So posture matters, and that's something that we work on with just about all of our patients, because the closer you can get to an efficient posture, typically the less discomfort that you have. Weight shift. How do you start? That should say dictates, not distaste. Sorry about that. How you start a movement dictates how you perform a movement. So if you shift your weight or move with a strategy that biases a dysfunctional movement pattern, that movement pattern is performed throughout the whole time of your gait, and you have to start over to reset that motor pattern. And we'll talk about that here in just a second. And then you have to have the appropriate shock absorption and propulsion strategies. So you need to be able to move that weight from your body down into the earth, and from your earth up into your body, and have appropriate coordination for push off. All right, that is it for our lab. We're going to stop the screen share, and we're going to get up and move a little bit. You guys ready? So hopefully you have a space where you can keep the camera available. You can turn the camera off if you don't want to be seen. That's not a problem. Really, what I want you to do is I want you to start to experience your body. Let me get some stuff cleared out here.
Turn my camera.
See how that's going? All right, everyone got me on the home screen there?
Yep.
Thumbs up, I think so. So let's take a minute. Yep. Let's take a minute and let's look at our postures. Some of the more common postures that we find in the clinic are when someone overextends, where they lift the rib cage up and they hold that rib cage up in the air. What does that do besides give you that sense of, oh, I got a good posture, right? I'm upright. My parents told me to stand up straight and pull my shoulders back and suck my gut. That's wrong. Please don't do that. Unlearn that as soon as you can. Because what does that do? Everyone stand for a second. Lift your chest up, suck your gut in, and hang out there. And just notice, over-exaggerated a bit, that the muscles in the back are working real hard. Oftentimes there's pressure in between the shoulder blades. The neck gets a little bit more tight. Now take a minute to be in this position and take a breath. It's in through the nose, out through the mouth, or in through the mouth, out through the nose, doesn't matter. And just notice that the breath comes nothing but more up into the chest, and it doesn't descend down to your rib cage or your belly. Practice that for a minute and just notice, is it comfortable? Is it uncomfortable? Maybe some people think this is the right posture and they've practiced it for long enough, so they think that this is comfortable. For a minute, feel where the weight is on your body. Is it more on the heels or is it more on the toes? If your weight is on your heels, then you're going to have to shift your weight forward and to then move, right? So you almost have to break your strategy of posture to then initiate movement, because we can't move living in extension that way. The other common posture that we see is this kind of 16-year-old, 14-year-old on a computer / iPad posture. This is the flat butt that's pushed forward, the rib cage is backwards and tipped down, and we're looking at this angle here. The head drifts forward, and allow yourself to be there for a minute. This feels a little bit more natural. So we're here. Take note again. Where does the weight go? Is it more on the heels? Is it more in the middle, or is it more on the toes? Take a breath in and just notice that where the breath goes. Can you expand the rib cage fully, or are you just expanding down into the belly, where you're getting that three-dimensional expansion, right? So now that you've seen some dysfunctional postures, what I want you to do is I want you to assume posture 1. Lift your chest up. And lift your chest up, I just want you to walk the room. And I just want you to feel what it feels like when you're walking the room. Focus on your feet. What does it sound like when your foot hits the ground? Is it hard? Is it punchy? Is it stiff? Remember, walking is shock absorption. You want to be smooth. You want to be bolt. You want to be able to move fluidly. And if you're rigid and upright, you're not going to have access to your belly, because it's going to be sucked in and tight. And you're just going to be leveraging everything from your back. All right, let's pause for a second. Actually, stay there. Go back to lifting your chest up. Put your hands on your pelvic bones. Hold your bones here. They're just above what you think your hips would be, kind of up where your waist is. Those are pelvic bones, not hip bones. Lift your chest up. Walk. And now picture that pelvis in space. Do you get to walk the way that Usain Bolt runs in this position? What tends to happen is that we become hip walkers. We just move the hip bones. We don't move the pelvic bones. So we lose that dynamic control in our pelvis. And we become much more dependent on our psoas. And that's where we get a lot of tension in our psoases. So just pay attention to that. Now, be posture 2. Drop your chest, slump forward, and just walk again. This is kind of sauntering along, Cannon Beach, on the beach. Oh, honey, my back's starting to hurt a little bit. I want to go back in. No, let's keep going. No, my back, seriously, it's hurting. That's what tends to happen, because every time you step, when you're in this position, you bend, and you bend, and you bend. And you can feel your spine flexing. You're going to get metal fatigue. If you bend a wire enough times, that's what's happening in your back. And that's where you start to see back problems. Notice how lazy it is, and you become dependent on the front of your shins to pick your feet up. You lose your core. So that's not a good posture. That's not a good strategy. So everyone, just for a moment, this isn't really fair to say, but if you're more like this, make yourself more like this. If you're more up, make yourself a little bit more down. Try and find that analogy of the can. You want your rib cage over the top of your pelvis. You want both of those can levels vertical, not tipped, not curled, just vertical. And if you're standing there as best as you can, be vertical, let your belly go. I know you guys a lot of people are sucking it in right now. Let it go. That's all right. And as you let it go and you stay vertical, notice where the weight goes. It should drop down through the arches of your feet. That gives you information. That gives you the musculature starts to fire in your feet. Those are core muscles. Those muscles need to work with your belly and your legs. In that vertical posture, put your hands back on your pelvis. Take a walk. and see in your mind's eye, does your pelvis move a little bit more fluidly while maintaining a more upright vertical posture. Do a quick check. Is your chest up? Drop it back down. Is your chest down? Bring it up just a little bit, but not too much. Notice that your core works a little bit better. Your heel strike gets softer. And all of a sudden, you're a little bit looser in your pelvis and in your body. So that's what we call changing the strategy. That's pillar number 3 of what we put onto the Gait manual. Changing your strategy can change a lot, but just changing your strategy doesn't mean that you get the other components working with you. It's a tripod. We want motor control. We want our muscles to fire. We want to have mechanical capacity. If you didn't notice much, that's fine. What I want you to do is just to kind of get used to this idea of being inquisitive, to being curious, to being informed about what things could be and how you're doing them. Give you a little bit of B. If you've been living in A, try a little bit of B. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take neuromuscular and we're going to start to address things from that perspective. So this is where you're going to need to get down on the ground or onto your bed. You're going to need your pillow. You're going to need a towel. And I think that's it. Give me a second to get ready and we'll circle back in 30 seconds. Got a good view. Sweet. In my notes. What I did in my notes. Okay, so everyone take your towel, hopefully you have it, and I want you to be about this big, and I want you to make some hot dogs. You guys know what I'm talking about? Hot dogs and hamburgers. You're gonna make a hot dog about this big. Why are we making a hot dog? Because we're gonna try and create a fulcrum. That fulcrum is gonna go right across our pelvis. This is a pelvis right here, the white part and the orange part. And we're going to put that right across the split. All right. It's going to go right above, right where the crack starts. Okay. You're going to make it straight across at first. Going to find that sweet spot to where you now have access to a downhill slope and an uphill slope. If you're laying on a clock, picture 12 o'clock is at your chest, 6 o'clock is at your tail. If you roll your pelvis behind you or towards 12 o'clock, that's what we call a 12 o'clock pelvic tilt. We're falling down the back of the towel, and then you're going to go to 6 o'clock, that elongation. You're going to go to 12 and 6. I want you to go slow. I want you to take 3 seconds up. 1, 2, 3. 3 seconds down. 2, 3. Up. 2, 3. Down. 2, 3. Up. 2, 3. Down. 2, 3. We're going to do 15. Keep going while I talk. Smooth. Ratchety movement is too fast. Slow down. Maybe you need a 5 count. The intention is not to work hard, but to feel movement. That's all I want you to do, is to feel it. Don't brace, don't become rigid, don't hold your breath. Relax, have fun. Nice and easy, back and forth. So what are we practicing? Lower abdominal flexion, lower abdominal extension. Two primary movements that have to happen in the pelvis. Keeping it real simple here. So that's about 15 now. Everyone feeling pretty good about that? Now take your towel and turn it on a diagonal so that it's facing, the towel goes towards the 1 o'clock and the bottom of the towel goes towards 7 o'clock. You get a good shot on that there. So now we're on a diagonal. So if we're on this diagonal, you're going to drop your pelvis down to the left and up to the right. So this is going to be 5 and 11. 5 and 11. 5 and 11. 1, 2, 3, pause. 1, 2, 3, pause. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Nice and easy. So now we're breaking the pelvis down into some diagonal movements. If we were walking, your left side would be swinging and your right leg would be standing. So this is the start of the engine, is to feel the engine and to get the muscles to turn on. Repeated movements can be helpful. You can even go to a point where you're going up and you can hold it and just hold the contraction. Slowly let it come down. Go up, hold the contraction, let it come down. Let's do 5 more. Up, down, up, down. Think left side, up and forward, down. Left side up and forward, down. Left side up and forward. That's it. Take a little break. Switch your towel, lift your bottom up, pivot the towel to the opposite diagonal. So the right side of the towel goes up towards your right shoulder. The left side of the towel goes towards your left heel. Opposite direction. So now we're swinging the right and then standing on the left. This is where my dysfunction starts to show up, my right side pelvic problem. I have a hard time dropping my pelvis down to the right or the stance phase and then up to the left, down to the right, up to the left, down to the right. Some people might feel, you might feel stiff on one direction. This becomes a little area that you can whittle on. Think of it like whittling on a stick, and you're trying to make it down to a point or something a little bit more creative than just a point. It just takes a little bit of time, and you have to go slow. You have to move with grace, with forgiveness, with curiosity, and purpose. So you have a goal. We're trying to get our walking going, breaking down the component parts, finding the rhythm. If you're struggling with this, slow down, try to do the movement in your mind, even if you can't execute it. Just practice it and your brain will start to recognize it. Think of your pelvis as that dark spot on the map. And every time you do purposeful movement that's slow and controlled, you're painting a picture in that dark hole. And eventually it turns into a beautiful picture. You got to get that information to the brain. Down to the right, up to the left. Down to the right, up to the left. That's it. Take a little break. Now, pull the towel out and just lay there for a second and just notice, does your pelvis or your lower back or your back muscles feel maybe a little looser just by having done some repeated movements versus trying to stretch them free? You just talk to them and they become less tight. Now, we're going to work a little harder here. So we've created the movement in the pelvis. Now we're going to create some demand upon the muscles. It should not hurt. This should not cause you to have pain. So stop if it does. We can do some modifications, but just bear with me for a second. So what you're going to do is you're going to do 12 o'clock tilts again, but I want you to take your left hand, grab your left knee, hold it there. Bring your right leg up, grab your right knee. Now let your arms hold your pelvis for your legs for a second. Make sure you're not working too hard. Make sure your neck's not too tight. What I want you to do is I want you to bring your knees a little bit more up towards your chest so that your pelvis starts to lift up. So you feel a rolling of your pelvis backwards or towards 12 o'clock. Once you feel your tailbone start to lift, I want you to freeze. Pull your toes to your chest. Take one hand away if you can, and take the other hand away if you can as well. If you can't and you lose the motion, put your hands back on. What I want you to do is I want you to allow your pelvis to roll down, and I want you to try to pull your legs up, not from your arms now, but more from your lower tummy. And I want you to hold it, and I want you to let it lower down. Use your arms to help you if you need it. Roll up, hold, let it slowly come down. Let it come up, hold, let it slowly come down. If you can do it without your hands, it looks like this. Up, down, up, down. With the hands, up, down. Don't hold your breath. Up, down. You should start to feel some work in your lower belly muscles. Pause, take a break, drop one leg, and the other. Okay, take a breath. Let the stomach muscles flush out a little bit. They should start to feel a little bit more awake. Left hand grabs the left knee. Right hand grabs the right knee. This time, instead of going towards 12 o'clock, you're going to go towards 1 o'clock. So a slight diagonal change. 1 o'clock is towards your left shoulder. Knees come up, hold, keep it, release your hands a bit, make your tummy muscles hold it, slowly let it come down. Let your arms hold you, pull your toes up, bring your knees up towards 1 o'clock, hold, slowly let it come down. Without the hands, it looks like this, up, down, up, down. With the hands, up, down. This is swing phase on the right leg in particular. Up, down, up, down. 2 more. Up, down, up, down. Grab a knee, drop one, take a break. Let your legs move a little bit, relax. Now, the right and the left come up again, this time towards 11 and down. Up to the right and down. Up to the right, hold, let it come down. Up to the right, no hands, come down. Try not to side bend. Really just think of the knees coming towards the shoulder. Repeat, up, down. Let's do 3 more. Up, down, up, down, up. Grab your knees, take a break. You get 20 seconds before you transition to the next exercise. Everyone go on to your side. Support your head. Stack your legs up. Bring your knees up, not to 90, not to 45, about 60. This is our focal point. The pelvis going this direction. You're going to lift your feet up, but make that motion happen here. The pelvis comes up and comes down. We're not going around. We're not going back. We're lifting the legs straight up from the pelvis. Up, down, up, down, We're just going to do another 6 more of these. Down. These are things that you should feel, and if you need more oomph, do more time. This is our engine. Move that motor oil. Get those horses going. Switch to your other side. The left sideline, hips at about 60 degrees. Pick your feet up. Make the motion happen at your pelvis. Try not to twist your torso. Try not to roll backwards. It shouldn't hurt the hip. You should just feel work down in the lower part of your tummy. Obliques, hip rotators, shoulder blade. A combination movement would look like this. This is the shoulder pattern put into it. Tends to strain the neck a little, so we're not covering that today. But that's what it would look like. Good. Everyone take a little break. So now we're going to move onto your hands and knees. So here we're in 6 point. We got some muscles turned on. Remember, we have a shoulder blade that needs to work. So what we're going to do here is you're going to find a position where you're not rounded, you're not saggy, but you're kind of in the middle, just like that cylinder. If your weight is back like this, shift your weight forward so that your hands are underneath your shoulders. From here, the only thing that I want you to do is I want you to be able to shift your weight to your left arm, to free the right arm, and to keep pressure down and not lose your posture. Hold that. Put your right hand down, shift your weight to the right arm. Hold that. Don't lose your posture. Shift your weight forward to put more demand on the arm. Shift your weight to the left arm. Hold. And just notice, does one side feel easier to bear your weight? Just go back and forth. Slow reversals. Back and forth. We're thinking posture. We're not holding our breath. We're just staying organized. From this position, come back to 6 point, hands down equally. I just want you to shift your weight to the left to pick your right leg up. Extend your right leg, thinking posture. I don't want to see a lot of trunk twist and rotation. Shift back, extend your left. Hold it, come back, your right, get used to it. Keep your right leg up. Notice the posture in your arms, it's still working. Bend your knee, push your foot to the ceiling. Push, push, push. Picture yourself like Usain Bolt. Can you do it? Are you overextending your back? Are you losing your posture? What we practice on your hands and knees should carry over if you practice correctly. Now, take that same leg, pull it forward. Pull it forward towards the left shoulder. Pull it forward towards the left shoulder. To the left. So we're going from extending to pulling. Extending to pulling. Extending to pulling. Take a break. Shake your hands out. Third time's over. Come back onto your hands and knees. Posture. Free your left leg. Kick it out. Bend your knee. Kick it up. 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 Now pull through towards the right shoulder. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, take a little break. Now, let's go to a view on the wall. We're almost through here. Got a few more exercises to do. Hopefully you guys can get to a wall. A space where you can pretend like you are being frisked. So hopefully you've never been in this position, but you're thinking posture. You're gonna lean forward, catch yourself with your arms, but I don't want to see your back sinking in. I want your posture. From here, shift your weight to your left leg. Take your right leg, bring it towards your chest with your toes up, and press up on your toes, and then lower down. Reach your right leg back, touch your toes, pull your leg up, get up onto your toes. Reach your leg back, touch your toes, pull your foot up, point your toes. Elongation, shortening. Elongation, shortening. This time we're including that stance phase. That's our big workhorse right now, is the gravity of our bodies trying to get that triple extension. Knees, hips, and toes. Knees, hips, and toes. Knees, hips, and toes. Pause, take a break. Switch to your other side. Lean into the wall. Shift your weight to your right leg, left foot, toes up, knee up, right leg, heel up. Drop your right heel, reach your left leg back. Posture. Toes up, point your toes. Point your toes, pull up, reach back. Bend that right knee, push off your right knee, get tall. Push off your right knee, get tall. Push off your right knee, drive your left leg up and hold. And let it come down. Push up and hold. And let it come down. Now take a break. Now, at the same wall, what I want you to do is I want you to take, you're going to do the old grapevine. Like you're in school. So what does a grapevine look like? Over, like this. Behind, like this. We're just going to do one motion, like this. We're going to be at the wall, so you can lean on it. I want you to move to your left. Let's take your right leg, reach it over, touch your right leg down, push off your right leg, bring it back over. Bring that right leg up and over and reach. 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 Right leg up and over. Why are we doing this? Walking is more complicated than just squatting or pushing up on your toes. It's a rotational movement. So we have to practice rotation, control on our stance leg. First time we've broken out of simple planar movements with these big patterns. And take a break. We're going to go to the right. Shift your weight onto your right leg, left leg, up and over, and touch. Up and over, and touch. Up and over, and touch. The working leg is the stance leg. So make sure when you shift your weight, you shift tall I'm even coming up on my toes. Up and over and reach. 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 Very good. I think that's all we'll cover. So what we'll do next is let's see, are we any better? So everyone stand. Maybe just do a quick scan of your body, a scanner from your head, down the neck, down the rib cage, through the pelvis, the feet, or the pelvis, the thighs, the knees, and the toes. Notice, having exercised now, reframed your body's awareness. What does it feel like to be in your upright posture? Remember, our target is vertical, vertical. Does it feel more balanced? Does it feel more natural to be vertical, vertical? I hope it does. It should feel a little bit more grounded, a little bit more easy to breathe, like you're ready to move. So now we could go samba, we could go dancing, or we could go walking. Hands on your pelvis. Take a walk. Feel your motor. Remember, you're Usain Bolt. You're the little baby. You're the man with no legs. How's your motor doing now? Get a sense of those bones moving in space. They should feel a little looser. By looser, that means your brain most likely is just feeling the awareness a little bit more. Versus actually being something to stretch free, you turned it on. Turning it on has a huge effect, more so than static stretching. So think of complementing your stretching with repeated movements. One thing that I like to do with my patients, what you should do is you should exaggerate it. Exaggerate your gait. Pretend for a moment that you're on Broadway, it's New York. You're backstage and you have a big plume of feathers coming out the top of your head. You're a rocket. And you're going to rocket. You're going to exaggerate your walk. I want to see that pelvis move. High stepping. Feel that motor so that you can feel like your legs go all the way up to your armpits. Reciprocate, move, feel that motor. Be that rocket. This can turn into other things. This can turn into skipping. Skipping is exaggerated walking, much like running. You're just practicing them with more force, more vigorous, just to give you some options. These are all things that we try to cover with our patients when we're trying to build new movement patterns. Why do we choose those movement patterns? Why do we choose gait? It's genetically ingrained. It's written into your DNA. You will have more access to your core muscles by working in those fundamental positions on the very baseline of how to connect your brain to the muscles. That's where it can happen very quickly. Then you can load it. Then you can sprint. Then you can add all sorts of variables to it. Try to build those motor patterns in that mechanical capacity, and you'll thrive. I hope that gives you a little bit of an awakening here at the end of the day. Thanks for participating with me. I'm going to do my best to answer any questions. Right now, I don't know if I'll be able to take you off of mute, but right now I have Manus and Kathy and Rebecca screens going. If you don't have any questions, we can say goodbye. If you have questions.
I don't have any
then you can
questions. I thought
answer.
it was really good.
Kathy, I'm sorry, I can't hear you, but we're trying to figure it out right now. I sure hope you had fun playing golf the other day.
I did. I
I
did.
pulled my oblique
Oh, no.
and my hamstring a little bit. So I guess God didn't make me a golfer, at least not a very good one. All right. Well,
There you
thank you,
go.
everybody. I appreciate the comments. Really appreciate you taking the time to spend some time with us today. Feel free to reach out to IPA Physio with any questions that you have or any concerns that you have. And if we can be a partner with you in your healthcare journey, that's our purpose. So please keep us in mind for any issues that you have. Okay.
Thank
YouTube
you.
link will be sent out once it's all edited and looking somewhat better than right now. Okay, you guys, enjoy your evening.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Good job. Very good job. Hats off to you. Bye-bye.
Bye.